What's up? Was there a question? I guess not. Okay, so like I said earlier, we will need Node.js and a text editor. So in this case, I suggest Visual Studio Code. And just a warning, if you do click on these links, it will take you off of Trackit. So make sure you do open the link in a new tab. Otherwise, it'll just remove you from the website.
I think this event was really amazing today. They did a really amazing job in creating this.
Someone's mic is unmuted.
It was really cool to hear from DSC.
All right, so we're gonna need to fork the repository. So if you go to the repository in the chat, oh my God, I'm sorry. If you go to the repository in the chat, you'll see a fork button in the top right. And you're gonna wanna fork this to just your profile. So here I fork this to my profile and it'll take a little bit. So now I have it under my profile and I have all the code with it. So now I can actually pull this code onto my desktop. Can y'all still see my screen? Can y'all see my desktop?
Yes.
So I'm just gonna make a new folder somewhere on my desktop. I'm gonna name this HTF projects.
Yeah, you're just sharing your browser. We can see your desktop.
There we go. Yeah, so I just made a folder on my desktop called HTF projects. And I'm gonna open up my Git bash in this folder. And I'm actually gonna clone the repository that I forked over to my profile. So make sure you don't clone the one that you forked, but clone the one that's in your repository. So this is the link. You can copy this and paste it into the terminal, but I like to type it and Jack likes to give me crap for doing that. So I'll do git clone, https github.com/ and this will be your user profile there. In this case, mine is snitch1 htfprojects.git. So now I'll clone into it. And so there we go. If I do cd htf projects, I should see the folder and it says main, which means I'm on the main branch. So now that we have the code, we can go ahead and open it in our text editor. So I'm using Visual Studio Code. And I name the folder HTF projects. So here we'll see the code, the JavaScript file, the CSS, and the app. So this is where our React is, our component. We have our divs, this is the card itself that will show up on the website. And here we have different elements that make it up. So one of the first things is the actual logo, which is the image, and the card contact info with your contact info, your email, your phone, your address, your website. One of the headers is your name, and you have an About Me section. And all of this can be changed, and Jack will go a little bit more into styling your cards, but I'm gonna just get you all set up with your own card files. That way, when you do make a pull request, it will show up on the website. So the first thing that we're gonna need to do is make our own card files. So if you go into the repository that you cloned, and you go to the SRC, and then you go to components, go ahead and just copy these files and then paste them in the same folder and rename them to something that makes them unique. So in this case, I suggest renaming them to your first name and last initial. So now I have the same two files, but they're named Samuel N. I can't spell my own name right. So if I go back to Visual Studio, I'll see that I have two files that are copied. They're just different names. And I'm going to need to change some code in here. That way they're unique from these two files, because if I were to just add the component to my app.js, it would just show up as the default card. So in our CSS, we need to change the divs because they are not unique. So I'm gonna just change each instance of ACM to be my name and my first name and my last initial. So do Samuel N.
Knocking at my door.
Sam, can you zoom in a little bit? A couple of students can't see very clearly.
Yeah. How do I zoom in on Visual Studio, Jack?
Control plus.
Okay. Yeah, so like I said, these divs need to be unique names. So I'm going to use my first name and last initial. And I'm not going to change the ACM logo one because I'm not going to change my picture. So that's done. So now we need to change the JS file. So it's important to note that you have to import the correct CSS. So this one is actually importing the ACM card styles.css, but this isn't going to be our card. So we want to change this to the name of our CSS file. So in this case, my CSS file is Samuel N. And then I also want to change the class name because there already exists a class called ACM card. So I'll also just change that to my first name, last initial. And make sure you also change the export at the bottom. So I'll go through this one more time. The import statement needs to import the name of the CSS file that you copied and renamed. You need to change the class name to also be something unique. So I suggest your first name and last initial. And then you also need to change the export statement at the bottom. Now, if you remember, we just changed the name of all the divs in our CSS file. So we also have to change them here, which this is what they're referencing. So I just changed this one to Samuel N, card contact info, and the card about me section. So now that that's set up, we can actually add our component to app.js. So here, I need to make sure that I also import the name of my React component. So in this case, I named it Samuel N from /components/Samuel N. And see, if it autofills, that means you know you did it right. And so now I can actually add my component here. So if we go back to the JavaScript, the attributes or this.props are the parameters that we're going to pass it. So you can change these, and Jack will go more into that. But in this case, I'm just going to pass it my name, my email, my phone, my address, and my website. So if I go back to app.js, and if I can add it right here underneath the default card. So this is the default card that shows up on the website. And I will name it Samuel M. My name is Samuel Nitch. My email is samuel.nitch@acmutd.co. My phone number, please don't call me. My address. And I don't have a website, so I will just use the one that it links to ACM.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are you doing this in app.js file?
Yes.
So everyone has to do it in the same file, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
So everyone will have their own CSS and JavaScript files, but in the app.js file, everyone will add a line underneath the default.
Okay.
And this is
got
where
it.
your component will actually show up on the web page.
Okay, thanks.
Jack will go a little bit more in depth. Right now, I'm just trying to get you all set up with the card itself, so that way y'all can start customizing it more when Jack explains the CSS, HTML and stuff. So hopefully y'all's Node.js is installed, and if you haven't installed it now, that's okay. I'm going to show you what you're going to need to install, what dependencies you're going to need to install in order to actually run the JavaScript or the React. So I opened up my command prompt because I like using command prompt instead of git bash because it's a lot faster. So I'm on my desktop, so I'll cd into HTF projects. and then I'll also cd into the actual repository that we forked. So now, if you have Node.js installed, you can use these commands. You only need to use 2 of them. We need to install 2 packages. So I'll do npm install ng create React app. So npm really is just a package installer for Node.js, and Node.js is essentially what allows us to run JavaScript code outside of a web browser. So this way we're able to install packages and dependencies and then run them on our desktop without actually using a web browser. So if I do npm install -g create React app, it will take a little bit. These dependencies are kind of big, and depending on how fast your computer is and whether or not you have a lot of storage space or anything, then it might take a little bit. So that one is actually really quick, but the next one is a little bit slower. So we're going to do npm install React scripts, and I can post these commands are also in the slides, and it's these 2 right here.
Make sure you add that global flag to React scripts as
Oh,
well.
thank you. This one does take a little bit. So while we wait for that, do y'all have any questions?
का फाइल डेस्कटॉप पे प्रिंट थे खाली तू
ये थे
Jack, is there anything you want to talk about with the CSS, like some of the things that they can change?
Oh, I think that's the
One
next
here.
couple slides.
Yes? No? Can no one hear me?
Hello?
Maybe?
Yeah, we
Yes?
can hear. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I do have a question about this this entire project.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past, I've had a lot of concerns about using Electron apps because they embed an entire process of Chrome into a single desktop application. Is React slimmer at all? Is it faster?
I know for
Well, React and Electron are like 2 different things. So that's like you're asking about 2 completely different projects.
Okay.
They
I don't really
they
have any
serve different
familiarity with
purposes.
JavaScript in general.
So React is mainly for front-end web development, or is for front-end web development. Electron is for desktop development.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
you might cut out.
So React is for front-end web development, whereas Electron is for desktop development.
Yeah.
Oh, then I'm confusing React with React Native.
Yeah. 2 actually very different things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And see, React is actually really good for development because instead of having to build the project every time, you can just do npm start and it'll run like a test version of your code without actually building it and all that stuff. So I found it a lot quicker than probably Electron. Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So for the npm install create React app, where do we do that command inside the HTF projects folder, or
Yes,
like
in the
anywhere?
repository. So you see, I named the folder on my desktop HTF projects, and then I also when I cloned it into HTF projects, the repository is called HTF projects. So make sure you're
Inside that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
For this command specifically, though, it doesn't matter because the -g you wrote is for global. So for this command, it doesn't matter. But generally, you want to do it in that folder.
If you didn't use a -g, then you might run into some problems. So yeah, React scripts does take a little bit to install. Now, how many of you are using Visual Studio Code?
I'm not, for the reasons aforementioned. I'm using Sublime Text.
I am.
Yeah, so you can actually open a terminal in Visual Studio Code, and you'll be able to run your Java or your React project straight from here once you have everything installed. Which is really cool. And I think it's what makes it really good for web dev, honestly.
Well, given that it is a web app, it must be good for web dev, right?
Yeah, good point. But you could use Sublime Text, or I mean, you could probably do a lot of web dev on Notepad if you really wanted to. I don't know why this is halted.
Yeah, React scripts is huge, so it might take a while. So we are going to go into more detail about specifically what all the code does as well. So if it feels like we're going kind of fast, the idea is that we kind of wanted to like try and do multiple things at once since we only have an hour for this. So it's kind of like hopefully you kind of get like a crash course while things are installing.
Yeah.
I'll take a little bit of time to talk a little bit about HTML, CSS, and JS if you're not familiar with those, just kind of like the basics. Then I'll take time to look at some of the code specifically that React uses. So.
Could you speak up? It's very difficult to hear you.
Sure, I can do that.
Thanks.
I don't know why this is not working. Oh, here we go. Guess I had to
So,
make it.
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so before you were installing this Create React app and React scripts, before this, were you just like showing a demonstration or something? Because I was like, I came a little late.
So what we were doing was setting up our card files, like the own business card files. That way,
Okay.
each person's is unique. I do have exactly what I did, like word for word, underneath getting ready to make changes. If you want to follow this.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll tell you what lines to change, but I can give you like a little rundown. Essentially, you're gonna just want to copy these two files in your repository, and then or in the repository that you cloned. So I went into here and I went to source components and I copy and pasted these two, and I renamed them to just be my first name, last initial. That way, mine is unique, because if everyone's is the same name, they won't actually show up. So. And then I just went in and I changed all the divs to be my first name and last initial. And then I did the same thing in JavaScript. So here I changed the div to match the ones that are in my CSS file. And I changed the export statement. And I made sure to import my CSS file. And then once that was done, I went into app.js and I imported my component, which is named Samuel N. And then I just added it right here. And I changed the name of the properties I changed the values of the properties. So I did my first name, last name, my email, my phone number, and my website. All right, so React script is installed. So if I go into here and I type npm start, get an error. What is this error? Jack?
Package.json.
Oh, here, I'll run it from my command. This is working. Here we go. Yep. So hopefully we'll see my card pop up. Yeah, and there we go. So this is the default card, and then I added my card, and here we see my name, my email, my phone or number, my address, my website, and I could have changed the About Me section. I just failed to do so. And really, you'll be able to change how this format is laid out. And when you do make a pull request, everyone's cards will show up here. And we'll show you how to do the pull request after Jack does his little intro on some JS, HTML, and CSS. So I'm going to pass it over to Jack. If y'all have any questions about any of the steps I just did, go ahead and ask me in the chat, and I can try and help. But Jack, take it away.
All right. So on the next couple of slides, there's links to GISs on GitHub that have some sample code of them. So npm start, by the way, you'd write in your terminal. Make sure you're in the same. For those of you who aren't having problems with npm start, make sure you're in. First, make sure that you've installed React scripts, and also make sure that you're in the same folder you're on the same level folder as the source file.
Yeah. So in this case, I can show them again if they want me to.
Yeah, try that. Yeah, so sometimes, depending on what order you did things in, you might be in a different folder from when you cloned it, from when you actually run the install commands. So if you're in the wrong folder and you didn't use the global flag, that could cause a problem. That was why we said use -G. And as well,
hold on.
you should be in the HTF project folder.
They're still getting a lot of problems. So I just opened my command prompt, my desktop, and then I go to the folder that I cloned the repository in. And then again, I go into the actual folder. And if I do npm start, then it starts the development server.
Did you already have Node installed by any chance?
Can't resolve React.
No, like, did you have it installed? Like, because I had it installed ahead of time, and I actually went in myself and changed one of the paths on my machine, and that actually caused some problems. Hold on. Yeah, so the warnings you don't have to worry about. I mean, at least not for this. Warnings are warnings. They're not necessarily code-breaking problems, at least not yet. But you get warnings. Make sure that, by the way, before you guys start making any changes, that you actually fork the repository before you start cloning it. Don't clone the repository directly because you won't have permission to push directly to the repository. So the level you guys should be on is you should be on the same level as the source folder, but I don't think you can do it in the source folder. You might be able to, but.
Make sure y'all's import statement is like / components, because I know if you just do components, it also might work or might not work. So in this case, this is what my import statement. Okay, you have that as well. Shit. Sorry, excuse me. I don't know. But we do got to go ahead with the workshop. So Jack.
Yeah.
Did y'all do it? Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
So go ahead.
We didn't have that problem.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes it can be a little finicky. It's really dependent on people's.
So the solution for those of you guys who are watching this recording was running npm install. I think that's like a default install of all required dependencies, but I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, restarting a terminal or restarting VS Code might be a good option as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Oh, it said it couldn't resolve React. I couldn't like find it or something.
You try the npm install, or just npm install. Some people were saying that was working for them.
Oh,
yeah, so once you install npm create React app, just go to the HDF projects and just type npm install. They'll install all the dependencies. Just npm install. That's it. Nothing else.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, thank you.
Can y'all see VS Code?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, cool. I can't see chat now. Hold on.
I'll take care of chat. You just go ahead and present.
I'll give y'all a few minutes to another minute or so to figure this out before I start talking about HTML, JavaScript, CSS. So, quick recap: people were saying that running npm install seemed to solve any problems they had. Yeah, we tried all this last night.
I can't see any business cards on the screen. Though the website renders, no business cards appear.
You getting any errors?
No errors.
Useful comment in chat. Someone said using refresh nv command will sometimes can refresh environment path variables, which might be helpful. So no errors. Check your Visual Studio or your terminal.
There are no errors.
Okay.
No errors.
I can't really help you then. There's no errors. I don't really know what to tell you.
Oh, so no cards are popping up, and y'all did an npm install.
Yes, that's correct. And no business cards appear.
Someone sees cards. Do you see your card, like y'all's cards?
No.
I'm asking the people that, okay, so some people got it to work, other people haven't. So I would make sure I don't know if, I doubt you didn't I'm not saying you didn't follow everything correctly, but I'm sure it's something that I have no idea how, what to do, honestly.
Actually, I think the best solution would be to could you commit your changes to your Git repository and post it in the chat? Then people can see what exactly is
We got to
happening.
move this workshop along, and
Yeah.
we just want to get everyone, try and get everyone on the same page. So.
All right. So can y'all still see Visual Studio? All right, let me close slide.
Yeah, we can still see it.
All right. All right. So if you go to the first slide that talks about HTML, I'm sure most of you probably know HTML, but I just want to run through it very quickly for anyone who maybe jumped right into learning something like React rather than starting at HTML, just plain old HTML. So the idea behind HTML is that it actually allows you to define a hierarchy of elements to make up a web page. It's been around since the early 90s. So this was, the most basic way to define a web page, and we still use it today. Everything's based on a tag system. So you have angled braces, which encapsulate a tag name. And most things have an opening tag and an opening tag. So this head tag here, it's got an opening tag. And we've also got a tag which closes it off. And inside the tag is where you put the tag's contents. You can put other tags inside of tags. You can put text inside of tags. So Hamad, the $, you don't actually type. The $, is a convention for command line interface documentation to indicate that it's a command. I think it's like a Google convention or something. So when you're defining your HTML page, you'll have all these elements, opening and closing tags. The first thing on this first line here is just would tell your browser that you're dealing with HTML. Then your entire web page must be wrapped in between two HTML tags. So we have an opening HTML tag, and if we scroll all the way to the bottom here, you'll see another HTML tag at the bottom. That's the closing tag. Notice the closing tag is indicated with this /. So a lot of basic site data, including metadata and the page title, will actually go inside of a head tag. This is also where you would put scripts and style sheets, but we don't have to deal with that in React, so I'm not going to go into it right now, just since we don't have that much time. So using the title tag, you can actually set the title of a web page. So this is the text that actually appears on the tab when you have it open. The actual site content goes inside of body tags. And here I just have some common elements that you might use. I have some basic descriptions of them. So you have various headers. If you've ever used Markdown, this is equivalent to using hashtags to represent different header levels. You can insert images. Images don't have a closing tag. I just want to point that out. And you can also provide it a source, which is what SRC stands for. And you can provide a string of a file path. So this is called an attribute here, and this will be important when I go through and talk about when I go through and I look at the HTF projects thing. We'll talk more about these attributes. Divs are really useful. This appears a lot in the project as well. These are basically just used to block a bunch of elements together. These are really, really useful. Spans are the exact same thing as divs. The difference is that they're inline. They don't actually break to a new line after that. The p tag is used for paragraphs. A's are used for links, and you can provide a specific URL to link to using the href attribute. I know I'm going kind of fast, but this is just kind of basic HTML. So the idea is that this is kind of just a crash course into it. You do end up using quite a bit of HTML. It's technically JSX, but it's essentially HTML. You're at the beginning, we have to worry about the difference. But when you're working in React, that's actually how you render things. If you want to define a button, then you really just create a button tag here, and you decide whatever text is inside the button in between the two tags. I don't go a lot into form elements on this in this example because you don't really need that for this kind of project. I do go in a list though because I did actually write a list into the example code. So UL is for unordered list. This is for just bulleted lists, and then you put every single item in list in between li tags. And then we have the same thing here, but for ordered lists. And again, everything goes in between li tags. So that's just a little bit about HTML. Probably most of y'all knew that, but in the event that you didn't, there's kind of a really quick crash course. There's really not too much to it. If you understand the concept of opening tag, closing tag, putting things in between the tag, and then attributes, then you're pretty much good. Like that's pretty much the whole scheme. So CSS, this might be a little less familiar if you haven't done web development before. The idea behind CSS is that it actually allows for styling and positioning of elements. So CSS has also been around since, let's say, mid-90s. I think it was around after JS, but I could be wrong about that. So it's been around for a long time. So it's become a very mature way of actually styling a web page. So the idea behind CSS is that you have what are called selectors. So you can actually select a certain element that's on a web page, and then you can apply different properties to it. So the first property the first selector I'm going to talk about is selecting IDs. So whenever you actually are in HTML, you may assign IDs to specific elements. If I come down here to this H1 tag, I can actually give it an ID by typing ID and then giving it some name, right? Maybe I'll just call it header. And then in a CSS file, I could actually target that specific thing by saying hash header. So the hash is what you use to represent IDs. IDs are unique, so only one element can actually have an ID. And that's as opposed to classes, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then here are just some common properties that you'll probably use at some point in CSS, and you'll for sure see this in the project itself. Unintuitively, if you type just color, that actually changes the text color. I don't know why it's not like font color or text color. It's just color. That actually will change the text color within the selected element. Font size, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's font size. Notice that you do have to type pixels because this is considered a unit in CSS. So this is literally just 50 pixel font. There's also various other fonts, like you can size things relative to the size of the default font. You can size things relative to the size of the window, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. If you want to change the font, the actual font itself, you can use the font family tag, the font family property, and there's multiple ways of typing this out, but you can give like the actual name of a font. I believe this is like a type of font, or this is like a family of font, and this is I'm not really sure what you would call this, but Koi or New is basically just like a monospace font. So like the space between all letters is exactly the same, so it's like good for coding. That's what the whole monospace thing here means. Like I said, there's multiple ways of doing this. You don't have to use the built-in fonts as well. You can use external fonts like Google Fonts. If you want to align the text some way, you can really just write text align, left, right, or center. Adding padding to an element, just type padding. You also have options like padding left and padding top, your top left, bottom right. You can also add margins. Now the difference between padding and margins is that padding is sort of within the element itself, whereas margins is around the element. That's really the main difference there. Sometimes they can kind of be interchangeable depending on what you're doing, but most of the time they're not. But sometimes I found that if you're looking just to add space, sometimes they'll do different things, but sometimes they can both be useful for helping space out your elements a little bit. You have width and height tags. Let's type height here to show what that's like. You have both width and height tags, which allow you to define the width and height of an element. And this is another time I wanted to introduce another unit we have in CSS, which is percentages. This basically tells CSS to make this element 50% the width of the browser window, and this tells it to make 50% the height of the browser window. If you want to add any borders, you can do that here. You can define the width of a border, the style of a border, and there's tons of styles here. You got things like groove. You have dotted if you're going for that, like 2000, 1999 style website. You've also got things like solid. That's probably what you'll use most of the time. And then you can give the border a color. And this can either be, most of the time it'll be text value, but you can also give it an RGB. If I swap it over here, you can give it HSL, and you can give it RGB as well. So most people use text though. The only reason why I included this part here is because you actually will see this in the React code. And that is that if this element is inside of another element which has the display grid property, you can actually tell CSS where to put this element in the grid. So I can tell it if I want to put this in grid 5, I just say grid row 5, and if I want to put this in row 5, I just say grid row 5. I've only put this in column 1, and I put it in grid column 1. You can also have things span rows or columns by putting / here between 1 and 5. And this is pretty useful. There's hundreds of properties in CSS. You could literally talk just for hours about that, so I obviously don't have time to do that. But these are just some of the basic ones. You also have a few different kinds of selectors. You can use a period to select all elements in a class. So a class is it's pretty similar as an ID. You would just type class, and you can give different elements classes. The difference between a class and ID is that multiple elements can actually have the same class. So if you just have tons of elements that you want to give certain styles, and you would just put them all in a class, and you can select using the dot selector here. And then finally, you can actually select specific elements by their tag. So if I wanted to select every single button, I can do that by just typing button here, and it will select every single button element. All right, and now I just want to talk a little bit about JavaScript. I'll go through this pretty quickly because probably most of y'all have done some kind of programming before, but if not, I'll just really quickly run through this. So in JavaScript, you have multiple different kinds of variables. You have scoped variables and variables that are unscoped, more or less. And I really just wanted to talk about let because I feel like this is what's used more. So you can use a let keyword to define a variable that's scoped, and scoped means that it will go in and out of scope depending on where it's actually defined in the program. This kind of works exactly as you would expect it to work, like in C++ or in Java. You can also use the var keyword, and then it kind of breaks those rules a little bit, which is a bit awkward if you've never used something like JavaScript before, but that's just why I introduced it as well. I want to talk about objects as well a little bit. You can define what's called an object by using the curly braces here. What an object is you can kind of think of it as like a hash map, more or less. That's kind of what it's analogous to because you've got keys and you've got values. If you ever worked with JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, it's actually derived from the notation of JavaScript objects, how you define object literals. It's really useful. That's kind of why I want to just like show you that this exists, and you can put anything you want here. You can even add like functions. So like if you have a function name, you can literally define a function here and then just store this function inside this object, which is really awesome. So they're really useful. The control structures in JavaScript are pretty much as you'd expect. They're similar to other languages like C and C++ and Java. The only difference here I want to talk about is that you have a different conditional operator. You do still have your traditional double equals operator in JavaScript. What this will do is it will see is if x is the same value as 15. But if I use three equal signs, that actually makes sure that they both have the same value and the same type. I could probably talk for hours about the type coercion system in JavaScript, so I won't, but I'll just say that JavaScript is really aggressively coercive when it comes to type coercion, because it'll automatically change the type of certain variables all over the place. So that's the reason why we actually have this, is so you can make sure that these two are both the same type and the same value. And of course, we have else statements, which just catch anything that's not cut up here. While loops work pretty much as you would expect them to. They will just run while a certain condition is true, same as in most other languages. And then for loops, again, pretty much work exactly as you would expect them to. There's a bunch of different types of for loops. I just wanted to show the basic for loop here. Functions, you define using the function keyword, and then you just give it the names of parameters, and then it can actually take arguments now. So this function can take 2 arguments, and the first argument you put in param1, the second one you put in param2. And then returning, again, works exactly as you expect it to. So JavaScript is pretty heavily inspired by C-like languages. I'm not going to go into details of classes because, again, that could take forever because the class system in JavaScript is kind of weird. But you would define a class using the class keyword. One thing I do want to mention about JavaScript, it's one reason why TypeScript exists, is that there's no type annotation. So I'm able to just say let x equals 15 without telling you that it's an integer, because people, or in this case a number, just the JavaScript type system is a little more generic. But you don't actually have to tell it that's going to be an integer, because JavaScript can infer that. Same thing here. You don't actually have to say this is an object. The JavaScript knows it is based on the fact that you're assigning it equal to some curly braces. And then finally here, there's no return type on the function. It can, or it may or may not return a value. You don't have to, you can't indicate it. And of course the parameters don't need, you don't have to type let here. That actually is an error if you do that. And these don't, again, don't have type annotations at all. If you're interested in type annotations in JavaScript, then JavaScript is definitely the wrong language. Probably check out something like TypeScript, which is basically transpiles to JavaScript. So I want to take a look at the actual project that y'all will be working with and talk about some of the most confusing things about it. So import allows you basically just to import external files from other files that are on your machine in JavaScript. Export is basically basically creates a module that basically allows you to use this file in other places. Allows this function to be called from other places, which is done by React. Talk about components. So every single component, pretty much everything you'll be making in React is a component. So this is just a class that is going to be inheriting from a built-in React class called component. And everything in React is a component. And the advantage to that is that you kind of can use the same general code for creating everything. Now, whenever you create a component, you must create this render method. And what this will do is that this is actually the code that gets returned, and this is the code that actually will get displayed in your web browser. And you notice a lot of this looks really, really similar to HTML. It's technically not HTML. It's technically an extension of JavaScript called JSX. I've heard it referred to as both JavaScript XML and JavaScript Extended. I'm sure one of those is probably more correct than the other, but whatever. It's essentially HTML for all intents and purposes. For right now, it's just think of it as HTML. And you can see some of the things we talked about on HTML sort of showing up here in this sample code here, namely IDs. I don't think there's any classes here. I think I mostly just use IDs, right? So all I have to do is run this or return. I'm returning a bunch of JSX code, right? And the advantage of being able to just straight up return the JSX code is that in app.js, when I actually write down or actually fill in my custom component, it will automatically know exactly what to write in your browser when you actually run this. So it's pretty convenient that you get to define things using HTML. You don't have to use the JavaFX style, where everything's a class, and it gets a little messy that way.
Hey, that's a good question. If they wanted to add their own custom icon, where would they add it?
Don't mess with the favicon, because that's like going to be dependent for the whole website. But if you want to add it, this should be in the instructions on the README of the repo. You can put it in this public folder up here, public folder images. So I actually have the ACM logo that I used on my card. So you can add it into the public images folder. But I'd ask that you don't mess with the favicon, because that's going to be something that everyone sees. So please don't mess with that. So in my ACM card.js, again, I talked about earlier how we have these IDs here. And now this is why we need these IDs. So this is a div that contains all of my contact info, right? So I got this ID here. And if we go over here to ACM card styles, ACM card contact info. So this is the ID. Remember, we use the hashtag to target IDs in CSS. And then I'm actually assigning it a specific property. In this case, I'm actually telling it where to go inside of a grid, because it's contained inside of something that has the display grid property, which I talked about briefly earlier. Another confusing thing I do want to discuss real quick is attributes. You notice here that even though I'm writing my ACM card component here, I'm passing certain attributes to it. Now, the attributes that I pass to this can be whatever I want. I can literally pass whatever I want here. They can have a name, as long as they're not a reserved keyword. So like I don't think I can type class, because that's considered a reserved JavaScript keyword. I could be wrong about that, but last I checked, that didn't work. But you could pass anything you want here, provided that it's not taken up by something else. And then, but you might be wondering, okay, what do I do with this data once I actually pass it here? And if you wanted to customize this where you pass in different data values, you could totally do that. That's totally fine. You could maybe, instead of a phone number, you wanted to do like a LinkedIn or something. You could totally just change this to LinkedIn. And then I'll show you actually how you could access that in your ACM card.js. So whenever you're actually dealing with components, every single component basically has access to a property called props, right? That's just short for properties. This basically refers to the current class that you're in, the current object that you're in. So every single time you pass an attribute, it gets actually put inside this property object. So you notice I passed an attribute called name. So I passed this property called name, and I called it the association with computing machinery. So if I access this.props.name, that's actually just going to be a string that represents the association with computing machinery. So if you actually look on the business card inside this H1 tag, it says the association with computing machinery, because that's exactly what I passed up there. It doesn't have to be a string, but it can be. In this case, these are all string. And I just do the exact same thing with everything else. This.props.whatever. So I passed email, phone, address, website, have access to all these. So if I wanted to add another object to this list, for example, let's say you added like a LinkedIn attribute in app.js, you could just access it by doing this.props.linkedin. You're not at all confined to the properties that I wrote in this template code, right? Those are just a place to get you started. So whatever you name them, whatever you name these properties is basically what the name of the variables are going to be inside the props. I know we're still having some problems with NPM. Does anyone have any questions generally over HTML, JavaScript, CSS? I'm not sure. Do you mean like specifically, Jesse? Do you mean specifically about React or about web development? I'm not sure. I think there might be a React class.
Yeah, Vaughn has a good question.
So components are sort of like custom HTML elements that transpile the regular HTML elements. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. It technically doesn't get. I don't know if it gets transpiled. I think it gets added via a virtual DOM. But basically, yeah. The idea behind a component is like imagine making a custom HTML element, and you can make it do whatever you want.
Well, I'm sorry that we had so much trouble getting NPM to work, and
this has been recorded at the very least. So if you want to go back to this, the track, it's going to still be there.
Yes. And I'm on Discord underneath Samuel Nitch, Hacktoberfest staff. So if y'all want to, after this, and y'all want to keep asking me questions and want to try and get some help, then I'd be more than happy to jump into a call with you and try and figure out the errors.
Yeah, me same here.
Jack, if you want to show them how to make a pull request so that they can their business cards can start showing up on the website.
Yeah, I don't have Trackit pulled up. Hold on. Or I do, but I need to share it because I'm sharing the wrong window. CSS.
That's a good question, Farhan, and I actually don't know the answer. I would try asking in the Discord how far you can.
Are you recording this, Sam? Or?
It is recording.
Yeah, but who started it?
I'm assuming Harsha.
Okay, so that's probably going to the cloud then. I don't know. I think this is the ACM account that hosts this, so I don't know what the deal is with that. We'll talk to Harsha and get it to you.
Anyway, show them how to pull.
Yeah.
Do a pull request.
So make sure again that you've actually forked this repository. Make sure that you're not actually dealing with HTML HDF projects. I'm not showing my screen. Hold on. Make sure that you're actually dealing with HTML or you're not dealing with HTML HDF projects. It should be your username /HDF projects, because that means you're working correctly in the fork of this repository rather than with the repository itself. And there, again, if you go to the pushing slide in the Trackit, you can actually see some basic Git commands of how you'll actually move your code from your machine to GitHub. So you do git add. This basically adds all the files that you've changed. Git commit prepares your code to be pushed to the cloud. You do have to give it a message here. Typically, I'd say use a descriptive message, but in this case, I don't really know if it matters just because everyone's not like you're really going to be dealing with anyone else's code for the most part. And finally, you can do git push. Now, after you've actually pushed your stuff to the cloud, you can actually come back to GitHub here. This happens command prompt or git bash. If you have Git installed globally, then it should work anywhere. But I think I just have git bash, so I can only use it for git bash. I think Git is built into most Linux distros, and I believe it's built into Mac OS as well. But I can be completely wrong about that.
And again, we're doing this within the repository of your project. So you're in HTF projects, and it's git add period, and that will add every file. And then afterwards, you do git commit -m, type a message here, and then you do git push. And then all your files will be pushed to the repository on your profile. And then now Jack's going to show you how you can do the pull request so it'll actually show up on the website.
So the idea behind a pull request is that you're basically requesting to have your oh yeah, it looks like people even got their pull request done. So the idea behind a pull request is you're actually requesting to have your changes be made to a repository. So whenever you actually work on any open source software, this is actually how you do it. And this is how DigitalOcean is going to get you your shirt basically by counting the pull request. So you come over this big green button right here that says new pull request. You click on it. And I don't actually have I don't have this forked, but you'll have it forked and it will show up here. And you can just click create pull request and it will create the pull request for you. And it will show up here, and then during the day here we'll be approving pull requests. So then as things get added, they'll actually be displayed on this website here. Nothing's appearing right now, obviously, because we haven't approved any PRs, but
they have made some PRs if you want to start accepting them. For some reason, I do not have access to do it again.
Okay, we'll get that fixed. I'm not gonna.
Oh, someone just merged it.
Presentation.
Sweet, awesome. Yeah, so they should start showing up on the website. Hopefully.
There's also some more details in the Trackit slides about how to do pull requests. If you're interested. So you're actually pushing to your fork of the HDF project thing, but to make a pull request, you're actually going to go to the ACMs because you're requesting to have your code added to ACMs.
Quick question regarding app.js. Are we creating our own copy and putting it in components, or like, are we just changing the one provided?
You'd add your component to app.js. So if you to answer the most recent question is in chat is if you actually go to your GitHub, you can see the commit message that you made, and it will show up there and saying it was successful. Plus, you should get some. If you get no errors, then it was successful basically in your terminal.
Okay, I have a question. So I ended up Samuel. I ended up just RFing the directory because I assumed it was cursed and it needed to be burned. But I entered this lecture thinking that it was going to be about React Native. Is there any way I can learn a little more about what it is and how it works? Any resources anyone can give me?
YouTube.
I mean, there's the documentation online that will actually like show you step by step how you can get started with React Native. React Native is more for mobile development.
It's not for desktop?
I mean, you can do it on desktop, but React Native works on mobile phones, like for Android and iOS, whereas React is for web dev.
Oh, then I seem to have further misconceptions because I thought that React Native also worked for building desktop applications.
It does, but it like its primary use is that it's cross-platform for multiple devices, right?
Yeah, I think Electron is for desktop. React Native is.
So it'll work on your laptop, it'll work on your phone, and it'll work on your Android phone, your Apple phone, right?
I think React Native is just for mobile devices. Electron is for desktop. Electron is very, very different.
Yeah.
Right, and I want to avoid Electron, but I also want to see what's possible with web development. So I thought that React Native might fill that void.
I just had a question real quick.
If you'll still need, yeah, go ahead.
Just another thing. Do we have to go change our name inside of AC, like the CSS file that we created for our own card?
Yes. So the reason why is because you basically have two CSS files that point to the same thing, or point to the same IDs. So you would have to customize the IDs that are actually in your card that you're customizing.
Oh, I see. Got it. Thank you.
No problem.
I have one more question as well. Like this, I didn't exactly get what you meant earlier about the app.js file, right? That was provided to us. Are we editing the same file, or are we creating a copy?
No, so app.js, you'll just add to that.
Okay, because then in the pull request, I'll get a conflict though.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
Yeah,
we're gonna have
'cause
to
you
work
made
through
a new
that.
line, right? And no one's lines are everyone's gonna have a different line there, so we'll just we'll have to deal with that. How do you want to do that, Jack?
Thank you.
It's gonna be GitHub's got a built-in editor for it, so I can do it via VS Code as well. Yes, your
Yeah, I see. I
have to
see.
check your
Yeah, I see your
pull
command.
request is on
Your
there.
pull request. Sorry.
Yeah, I just reopened it. I thought there was an issue because it's a conflict, so I closed it, but I reopened it.
So we're probably about to get this call is about to get moved at about 2:15. So, because there's another event going on.
Yeah, we have no leeway. It's good. So there's no.
Yeah, there's nothing I can do once it hits 2:15.
But you can reach out to Samurai.
Yeah, we'll
a
be
lot of the
available.
a lot of the development team as well knows a lot about React.
Yeah,
So
and
you can ask any of them.
we'll help you out. But thanks so much for tuning in. Sorry for everyone that had trouble with setting it up and getting the React app to actually work.
Oh,
But,
thank y'all.
Yeah,
this is like out of the. I mean, this is my only second workshop, but I actually got the actual whole thing to work. So thank y'all.
Yeah. Oh, it didn't work for you in the last one?
Yeah, no, in the previous one, the website one, it was just like not working out. Like for some reason, it was just doing it. So I'm happy that I at least got one done.
Hey, if y'all still want to continue with it, y'all can like shift to Discord. We have to start another panel soon.
All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'll be on Discord if y'all need help with anything.
And yes, we'll be closing pull requests.
And we'll be doing the pull requests and everything throughout the day. So
Yes.
don't worry about when you do it, or
as long as